Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. Emma Delacroix had always been the type of person who believed in the power of science, facts, and reason. She had spent her entire life trying to dispel myths and superstitions, dedicating her career to the world of marine biology. But she couldn't ignore the strange tales that surrounded the remote town of Marlow and its dark lake. She had arrived at the town's small, weathered train station in the late afternoon. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden light over the distant hills. Her travel bag, stuffed with the basics, clothes, notebooks, recording equipment, hung loosely over her shoulder. Emma was a professional through and through, and this was her first real research trip since finishing her studies. Despite the skepticism she felt about the supernatural rumors surrounding the lake, she had come here to study the strange, blackening phenomenon that supposedly occurred every decade. She wasn't here to buy into the town's legends. She was here to prove them wrong. The town of Marlow was small and unassuming, a cluster of old cottages nestled along the edge of the vast, dark expanse of the lake. The air was crisp, but there was something unsettling about the atmosphere. As Emma stepped off the train, she noticed the oppressive quiet that hung over the place. It wasn't the usual hum of town life, children playing, cars passing by, people chatting on street corners. No, here, it was as if the very air itself held its breath. The streets were empty, save for a few scattered pedestrians who all seemed to move with purpose. Heads down, eyes avoiding any interaction. She pulled up the collar of her coat, more from the growing unease than from the actual chill in the air. It was odd. This was supposed to be a quaint town, after all, a perfect place to conduct her study. But something felt off, and Emma's natural instinct to observe and catalogue everything around her kicked in. As she made her way toward the small inn where she'd be staying, she couldn't help but notice the faces of the people she passed. They weren't unfriendly. No, that would have been easier to understand. They were just vacant. Their eyes, dull and lifeless, didn't meet hers. When she smiled at an elderly woman leaning on a cane, the woman simply nodded, then quickly turned her gaze back to the ground. When Emma reached the inn, the owner, a stooped old man with a white beard and rheumy eyes, greeted her with a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be Miss Delacroix," he rasped, his voice cracking as he handed her the key to her room. "The lake's a mighty powerful place, but I hope you'll be careful about asking too many questions. People around here don't like it much when outsiders start poking around in things better left alone." Emma paused, taken aback by his warning. "I'm not here to pry, just to study," she said, offering a reassuring smile, though it faltered under his stare. "I'm a scientist, Mr. Call me Mr. Harrow," he interrupted, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That lake, there's things about it you won't understand. I suggest you stick to your research and leave the legends alone. Trust me, you'll be better off that way." Emma frowned, wondering if this was just the town's way of warding off outsiders, or if there was more truth to the strange stories than she wanted to admit. But she didn't let it deter her. She was a scientist. After all, there was nothing to fear in facts. She wasn't here to buy into local superstitions. She took the key and walked upstairs to her room, which had a modest view of the lake through a fogged window. The sun was nearly gone now, and the lake seemed even darker, its vast surface like a mirror reflecting the fading light. After settling into her room, Emma unpacked her things. Her first priority was to set up her equipment. She placed a few recording devices around the window, the ones she'd used to capture the environmental sounds of the lake. Theories about the phenomenon she was studying suggested there might be a change in sound frequencies when the waters turned black. Emma wasn't sure how accurate the theory was, but she'd need data to back it up. She attached a portable camera to the window frame to monitor the lake's surface as well, in case something unusual occurred. She turned on her laptop, checking the weather reports and reviewing her notes on the town's strange history. The blackening of the lake had happened every 10 years for as long as anyone could remember. Locals spoke of it with a mixture of fear and reverence, treating the event like some kind of natural disaster, but one with a supernatural cause. In her research, Emma had found no scientific explanation for it. The waters didn't seem to change temperature, pH, or mineral content in any way that would account for such a drastic transformation. Theories ranged from algae blooms to pollutants, but none had been proven. As a biologist, she was skeptical. Something about the way the locals talked about the lake, the way they acted, suggested it wasn't just a natural event. It was as if they believed the lake was alive, in some sense. Alive with something older than the town itself. The thought made her uneasy, but she shook it off, focusing instead on the data she planned to gather. She had come here to be the first to document the phenomenon scientifically, and she wasn't going to let local fear and folklore deter her. After unpacking, Emma decided to go for a walk before it got too dark. The weather was cold but clear, with just enough chill in the air to make her thankful for her warm coat. She locked her door behind her and walked down the narrow street, her footsteps echoing on the old cobblestone. The town seemed quieter than it had been when she arrived. Now there were no sounds at all. The shops were closed, and the few people she passed didn't acknowledge her presence. She found it unsettling, but she didn't want to seem too eager to ask questions, not yet. Emma wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe she thought something would reveal itself if she simply paid attention. As she walked, she noticed that many of the houses had their curtains drawn. A few doors were locked, though it was still early in the evening. She reached the shore of the lake and stood there for a moment, looking out at the vast, still water. The reflection of the sky was darkening, and a thick fog seemed to rise from the water's surface, obscuring the distant shoreline. It was beautiful, eerily so. The lake stretched out before her like a black sheet, seemingly endless. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. A few feet away, an elderly man was fishing off a small dock, his back hunched, his face unreadable in the fading light. She watched him for a moment, his fishing pole unmoving, and then she stepped closer, unsure of whether to introduce herself. "Good evening," Emma said, her voice breaking the silence. The man didn't respond, but Emma wasn't surprised. His lack of attention seemed typical for the town. Still, she pushed on. "You've been here a while?" she asked, trying to start a conversation. She wasn't here to gossip, but it might help her understand the lake's strange hold on the town. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes dim and unfocused. "I've been here all my life," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Fished here when I was a boy. This lake, though, it don't give up its secrets easy." He turned his eyes back to the water, clearly not interested in continuing the conversation. Emma hesitated. "Is there anything unusual about the lake?" she asked. "Something that might explain why it turns black every 10 years? Unusual." Man didn't answer for a long moment, and when he did, his words were barely audible. "Best leave it be, Missy. Some things are best left alone." Emma's brow furrowed as she watched him. The strange resistance to even acknowledge the lake's oddities left her feeling like an intruder, like she was asking the wrong questions. But she knew she couldn't back down now. She had a job to do. "Thank you for your time," she said, though the words felt hollow. She turned to leave, but the man's next words made her pause. "They say the lake takes what it wants," he muttered, his voice thick with an unspoken warning. "Don't be the next one to make it angry." Emma didn't know what to make of his words, but they lingered in her mind as she walked back toward the inn. For the first time since her arrival, she felt a flicker of doubt. What was it about this lake that made everyone so fearful? The morning after her unsettling encounter with the elderly fisherman, Emma decided to visit the local library. She had expected the town to be a bit more welcoming, but the cold distance between the townspeople and her was beginning to gnaw at her. Perhaps, in their eyes, she wasn't just a scientist. Perhaps she was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their town and had no right to uncover their secrets. But Emma had a job to do, and a small part of her couldn't help but feel drawn to the mystery. She needed to understand the lake, its blackening, and why the townspeople were so guarded about it. The only way to do that was to learn more about its history. The library was an old building tucked between two houses near the center of the town. It had a musty, antiquated smell, and its shelves were crammed with books so old their spines cracked when touched. The wooden floors creaked under Emma's boots as she stepped inside, the dim light casting shadows on the rows of bookshelves. She saw a few elderly patrons quietly reading, their heads bent low over their books, their presence adding to the air of quiet resignation that seemed to hang over the place. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with dark, greying hair sat, reading a book, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched on the end of her nose. When she noticed Emma approaching, she looked up, offering a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same vacant smile Emma had encountered elsewhere in the town. "Can I help you?" the librarian asked, her voice soft but wary. "I'm looking for information about the lake," Emma replied. "The one that turns black every decade. I'd like to understand the phenomenon better." The librarian's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. She set her book aside and motioned for Emma to follow her down a narrow hallway that led to a small room at the back of the library. The walls were lined with dusty, leather-bound volumes and old manuscripts that seemed to whisper of long-forgotten times. Emma felt a strange sense of reverence here, as if the room itself held secrets it wasn't eager to share. The librarian pulled out a large weathered book from one of the shelves, its pages yellowed with age. "This is about the town's history," she said, placing it on the reading table. "You'll find what you're looking for in here, but be careful what you read. Some things are best left undisturbed." Emma opened the book, flipping through pages of town records and early settler accounts. The lake's history was intertwined with the town's earliest days, though it was clear that much of the information was vague or incomplete. The first mention of the blackening came around the turn of the century, and it was already framed in the context of a curse, a dark omen that had been passed down through generations. She came across an entry that described a local woman named Isabella Hartfield, who had drowned in the lake nearly 100 years ago. Isabella had been a young, beautiful woman from one of the wealthiest families in Marlow. Her death had shocked the town, especially since it had occurred under mysterious circumstances. The townsfolk had always claimed Isabella had been seen arguing with a man the night before her death, though no one knew who he was. The lake had swallowed her body, and when it was found a week later, she was barely recognizable. Her skin blackened and mottled as if the water had consumed her in some unnatural way. As Emma read, the chilling nature of the event settled over her. There was a strange, almost poetic detail in the town's accounts. Isabella had drowned on the night the lake turned black for the first time in living memory. The water, it seemed, had been drawn into a new phase of existence after her death, and the blackness was tied to the tragedy. The librarian stood quietly beside her as Emma read, her eyes watching intently. When Emma finally looked up, the librarian spoke again, her voice low. "Isabella wasn't the only one," she said, her eyes flickering nervously to the door. "The blackening, it started with her, but it has been tied to the town ever since. Every decade, the lake turns black again, and every time someone goes missing. Sometimes they return, sometimes they don't, but it always happens when the water is at its darkest." Emma set the book aside, her mind racing. She was beginning to see a pattern, one that was both haunting and scientifically elusive. What had caused the blackening in the first place? Could it have been an environmental phenomenon triggered by Isabella's death? Or was there something more sinister at play? But it doesn't just happen on its own, does it? Emma asked, her voice tight with curiosity. There's something more behind it, isn't there? The librarian hesitated, then nodded, though her expression was filled with unease. The lake didn't turn black until Isabella's death, but after that, the curse became real. Every decade, the same thing happens. It's tied to the spirit of Isabella, they say. She was wronged in life, and she's been trying to get vengeance ever since. Vengeance, Emma echoed, her brow furrowing. From who? From the man who killed her, the librarian murmured. Her lover, a man named Thomas Merrick. He was one of the town's most respected men, a wealthy businessman. But no one knew about the affair they had, or how it ended, until after she died. People said they had a secret plan to run away together, to leave everything behind. But he betrayed her. He left her to drown in the lake, and that's when the curse began. The town has never been the same since. Emma absorbed the information slowly. There were still so many unanswered questions, but she was beginning to see a dark thread connecting the town's history to the lake's strange behavior. She glanced back down at the book, flipping to a later section. There were more mentions of the blackening, each decade marked with an unexplained disappearance or tragedy, and each marked by the lake's ominous darkening. The people here believe the curse can only be lifted if the wrongs of the past are righted, the librarian continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But no one has dared to try, not since the last man who attempted it disappeared without a trace. Some things are better left alone, Miss Delacroix. Emma closed the book gently, her mind whirling with a mixture of doubt and intrigue. I don't believe in curses, she said, her voice firm, though her stomach churned. But I do believe in the power of science. If there's a reason behind this, I'll find it. The librarian's expression softened, though the fear still lingered in her eyes. I hope you know what you're doing, she said. Some things are better left to the town's history. Not everything should be uncovered. With those parting words, Emma left the library, the weight of what she had learned heavy on her shoulders. The lake, it seemed, was more than just a body of water. It was a place tied to death, tragedy, and something far older than she could understand. And as much as she told herself she was here to uncover the truth, a small part of her wondered whether she was already in too deep. The evening air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and the ever-present smell of the lake that hung like a whisper in the background. Emma stood in the small inn's dining room, sipping on a cup of lukewarm tea. She glanced out the window toward the darkening horizon, where the lake stretched out vast and silent in its growing blackness. A subtle fog was creeping along its surface, curling around the edges like fingers slowly reaching out. It had been a strange day, one filled with cryptic warnings and unsettling accounts from the townspeople. The librarian's words still echoed, in Emma's mind, as though the town's history were alive and watching her, ready to reveal its darker secrets when the time was right. But Emma was determined. She couldn't turn back now, no matter how many shadows seemed to loom in the corners of her mind. As the last of the sunlight faded from the sky, Emma decided to head outside for a walk. She told herself it was just for fresh air, to clear her mind and stretch her legs, but deep down she knew she was drawn to the lake. There was a magnetic pull to it, an undeniable force that seemed to beckon her closer. She wrapped her coat tighter around her and stepped out onto the gravel path that led toward the shore. The town had grown even quieter as dusk settled in. The streets, once almost deserted, now seemed completely still. Even the occasional wind that had rustled through the trees had died down, leaving behind an eerie calm that felt unnatural. Emma's footsteps echoed off the cobblestone street as she walked, each step seeming louder than the last. The weight of the silence grew heavier the farther she walked, pressing in on her chest as though the air itself was trying to suffocate her. She reached the edge of town, where the land met the dark expanse of the lake. As she stood on the shoreline, looking out across the water, a strange tension filled the air. The lake was no longer the deep, reflective blue she had seen earlier. Now it seemed as though the water itself was fading into a deeper, impenetrable blackness, a darkness so complete it swallowed the reflection of the sky and the surrounding hills. The fog had thickened, now swirling in the distance, its pale white tendrils creeping across the surface like something alive. There was no moon yet, and the stars had begun to appear overhead, casting faint glimmers of light over the scene, but the lake was unmoving, unnaturally still. Suddenly, she heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft to be noticed at first, like the rustling of paper or a whisper in the wind. It came from the direction of the lake, floating through the mist. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she froze in place, listening intently. The sound came again, clearer this time, a faint, almost melodic hum, distant and soft, like voices speaking in a language she couldn't quite understand. She squinted, trying to locate the source. The fog obscured everything beyond a few feet, and the water itself was so dark that it felt like a bottomless pit, stretching on forever. Then, as if the lake had exhaled, the sound stopped. The silence returned with a heavy thud, almost as if the entire world was holding its breath. Emma stood there, her skin prickling, every instinct telling her to leave, to turn back before the darkness could pull her deeper into its web. But she didn't move. She was a scientist, after all. There had to be an explanation. The wind, the fog, the peculiar acoustics of the lake. It could all be part of some natural phenomenon that she just hadn't accounted for. There had to be a rational answer. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she stepped forward, the cold air stinging her face. She wanted to stay close enough to observe the water, to study the way the mist curled across it, but her feet seemed reluctant to move. Just then, a sharp crack split the stillness. It sounded like a branch snapping, but it came from the water, not the trees. Emma's eyes darted to the shore, where a dark shape had broken through the mist. She stepped back, her heart racing. At first, she thought it was a log drifting on the surface, pushed by the currents. But then she realized it was moving differently. It wasn't drifting. It was shifting, deliberately, as though something was pulling it, something unseen, something not natural. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but curiosity won out. She stepped forward again, narrowing her eyes to get a better view. The shape was moving closer now, slowly but steadily. It was dark, jagged and shifting in the water like a shadow trying to break free. Emma felt her breath catch in her throat as the shape grew larger, rising from the depths. The mist parted slightly, just enough for her to see a pair of eyes staring directly at her from the water. They were dark, hollow eyes, empty and yet full of a terrible weight. A sharp breath escaped Emma's lips as she took an involuntary step back. The eyes did not blink. They did not move. They simply stared, unblinking and unmoving, as if they were waiting for something. And then, the shape submerged back into the water, vanishing beneath the surface as silently as it had appeared. Emma stood there for a moment, frozen in disbelief, her body stiff with fear. Her breath was ragged, her pulse thudding loudly in her ears. She glanced around, but there was no sign of anyone, no sound, no movement. The lake had returned to its eerie calm, and the mist rolled gently along its surface, hiding whatever strange thing had just happened. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The lake seemed to hold its breath as well, waiting for something. But what? And why had she felt so connected to it? As if she had been lured here, as if it had been calling her from the very moment she set foot in this town. Her mind spun as she turned to leave, a sense of dread settling over her. She had come to Marlow to study the lake scientifically, to find explanations, to separate myth from reality. But what she had witnessed just now, it felt beyond explanation. It felt ancient, like something that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. She hurried back to the inn, her steps quick, and as she glanced over her shoulder at the lake, she could have sworn she saw movement, a ripple that had no source. But when she turned back to look, the water was still, like glass. Back in her room, Emma bolted the door, feeling the weight of the silence press down on her. The unsettling sensation of the lake's eyes still lingered in her mind, and the voice, the whisper she had heard from the depths, echoed faintly in her ears. What was going on, and why had it chosen her? That night, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She lay in bed, the room dimly lit by the faint glow of a street lamp outside her window. The wind had picked up, rattling the old wooden frames and making the distant trees groan and sway. But it wasn't the wind that kept her awake. It was the eerie stillness that seemed to permeate the town, an unnatural quiet that pressed in from all sides. Her mind replayed the events of the evening, the dark eyes beneath the surface of the lake, the odd hum that had filled the air before. It vanished as abruptly as it had come. She knew she had to be careful. Her scientific mind told her that there had to be a logical explanation for it all, something rational. The strange sounds could have been a natural occurrence, the shape she saw in the water, perhaps a large fish or an old tree root rising from the depths. But no matter how much she tried to reason it away, she couldn't escape the feeling that something else was at play. With a sigh, Emma rolled onto her back, closing her eyes in an attempt to sleep. But as soon as she did, the shadows in her room seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. Her eyelids fluttered closed, and before long, she drifted into a restless sleep. The dreams began almost immediately. She was standing on the shore of the lake again, though this time it was under a heavy roiling sky. The water was blacker than it had been before, the color of tar, stretching out to infinity. The fog rolled in thicker, cloaking everything in a dense, suffocating haze. She could barely see a few feet in front of her, but she felt something calling her, beckoning her to move closer. As she approached the water's edge, a figure appeared before her, emerging from the mist. It was a woman, her long, dark hair falling in damp tendrils around her face. Her clothes were tattered, as though they had been torn by the very water she had come from. The woman was pale, her skin almost translucent, and her eyes, Emma could feel them before she even saw them, burned with an otherworldly intensity. They were dark, hollow, empty eyes, the same eyes Emma had seen beneath the water. The woman stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the mud. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, the whisper, the one Emma had heard by the lake, came again. It was faint at first, but as the woman drew closer, the words became clearer, sharper. "You shouldn't have come," the voice said, but it wasn't the woman's voice. It was something older, deeper, a voice that seemed to echo from the very depths of the lake. Emma tried to speak, but her mouth felt dry, frozen. The woman's face shifted, becoming more distorted, her features blurring and flickering like a flame in the wind. Her eyes widened, her mouth stretching into a silent scream. And then, in a violent rush, the woman lunged forward, her fingers outstretched, reaching for Emma's throat. Emma jolted awake, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was dark, the only sound the rapid thudding of her own heart. She sat, up quickly, the sheets tangled around her legs, her body drenched in cold sweat. Her mind was racing, still reeling from the intensity of the dream. What was that? She had never experienced anything like it. The woman, the eyes, everything felt so real, so tangible, like the dream was more than just a figment of her imagination. It felt like a warning. She ran her hands through her damp hair, trying to calm herself. It was just a dream, she told herself. Nothing more than the result of stress and the strange atmosphere of the town. But deep down, a part of her wasn't so sure. She glanced over at the window. The moon was high in the sky now, casting a pale, silvery light across the room. Through the glass, she could just make out the outline of the lake, dark and silent. The mist had lifted somewhat, but the water was still an inky black, reflecting no light, no stars, nothing. It looked as though it were waiting for something. Emma turned away from the window, trying to push the thoughts from her mind. She reached for her notebook on the nightstand and scribbled down some notes about the dream, though the words felt like they didn't make sense, like they weren't her own. She wrote about the woman, the eyes, and the feeling of being pulled toward the lake, as though something was drawing her in. She needed sleep, but the sensation of being watched, of being surrounded by something unseen, made it impossible to drift back into a peaceful rest. Her pulse still raced, and every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside seemed to echo through the room, amplifying her anxiety. The wind outside began to pick up again, rattling the shutters with an unsettling force. The sound grew louder, turning into a howl, and Emma winced, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. Instead, she began to hear something else, something faint, just at the edge of her hearing. The whisper. It was coming from the lake. Faint at first, but growing louder. Emma stood, her legs trembling beneath her, and crept to the window. She pulled back the curtain just slightly, her heart in her throat, as she peered out into the darkness. The lake was as still as it had been earlier, the surface as dark and unyielding as before. But the whisper, it was unmistakable now. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the trees. It was a voice, distant but clear, and it called her name. Emma. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she strained to hear. The voice was soft but unmistakably clear. She leaned closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The figure in the lake appeared again. This time, Emma could see her more clearly. The woman's pale face was twisted in agony, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, and the blackness of the lake seemed to stretch back beyond them, pulling the figure deeper into the water. "Help me!" Emma recoiled from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure in the lake was no longer just a dream. It was real. The voice faded away, and the wind died down as suddenly as it had started. But the silence was worse, colder than before. Emma's thoughts were in a whirlwind, spinning, chaotic. The lake, the woman, the eyes. It was all connected. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't just a legend. This wasn't just a myth. Something in the town, something ancient was stirring, and Emma had unknowingly walked right into its grasp. She stumbled backward, shaking, until she collided with the wall. The whispers seemed to linger in her ears, and she was filled with a sickening certainty. She wasn't alone, and whatever was in the lake, it wasn't done with her. The morning after Emma's terrifying encounter with the lake, she awoke with a sense of dread hanging over her like a thick fog. Her body ached from lack of sleep, her muscles tight from the tension of the night. She hadn't been able to shake the dreams, the whispers, or the haunting image of the woman from the water. She had tossed and turned, her mind swimming in confusion and fear. It was only when the first light of dawn broke through the curtains that she managed to sit up in bed. She rubbed her eyes, trying to clear the disorienting images that still clung to the edges of her mind. The room felt unnervingly quiet, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. though she had no idea where it was coming from. She felt watched, as though something had been observing her every move while she slept. Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to push the fear aside. She had to keep her head clear, focus on the task at hand. The lake was still her primary objective, and she wasn't going to let irrational fears cloud her judgment. But the strange connection she felt to it, the undeniable pull toward the water, was becoming harder and harder to ignore. She stood up, her legs shaky, and walked to the window. The town of Marlow lay still beneath the grey sky, but it wasn't the town that caught her attention. It was the lake. It had started. Where there had once been a deep, reflective blackness, there was now a visible shift, a sickly, oily sheen on the surface, like the water was slowly being consumed by something darker. It was as if the lake was awakening, its surface rippling in slow, deliberate movements despite the absence of wind. Emma's breath hitched as she watched, a sense of foreboding creeping over her. She'd read about the lake turning black every decade, but seeing it with her own eyes made the legend feel too real, too undeniable. Without thinking, Emma grabbed her coat and stepped outside, her feet carrying her toward the shore. She knew she should take precautions, gather her equipment, observe from a distance, but the pull of the water was too strong. The dream from last night, the woman's desperate plea, echoed in her ears, urging her to go closer, to understand. As she walked through the streets, the town seemed even quieter than before. There were no children playing in the yards, no people walking down the cobbled streets. It was as though the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Emma couldn't help but feel like a foreigner in a place where she wasn't meant to be, as if she had unknowingly crossed an invisible line that separated the normal world from something much darker. By the time she reached the lake, the water had darkened even more, the blackness creeping like ink across the surface. It wasn't just the color that disturbed her, though. It was the way the water moved, or rather the way it didn't move. It was still, yet somehow alive, as if it were a living entity that was biding its time, preparing for something. The silence hung thick in the air, oppressive, like the lake itself was waiting for a signal to begin. Emma stepped closer, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. She crouched down by the water's edge, her fingers twitching with the urge to touch the surface. Something inside her was telling her not to, telling her to turn around and leave before it was too late. But she couldn't bring herself to move. The dream, the whispers, the eyes, everything was pulling her in. As her fingers brushed the water's surface, a chill shot through her, colder than anything she had ever felt. The lake's surface rippled beneath her touch, though the water was still otherwise. And then, with a suddenness that made her gasp, the water seemed to shudder, as if the lake had just taken a deep breath. The ripple expanded outward in concentric circles, spreading across the water like a ripple in time itself. Emma pulled her hand back quickly, her pulse racing. She stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the expanding rings of darkness that spread across the lake. The water seemed to change right before her eyes, darkening further, the oily sheen thickening until it appeared almost like tar. The air grew colder, and Emma's breath came out in visible puffs. A low, guttural sound, something like a rumble, like the lake itself was waking up, emerged from the depths. It wasn't natural. It was a sound of something old and buried, something that had been asleep for a long time, now stirring. The earth beneath Emma's feet trembled slightly, and she staggered back, her mind racing as panic began to set in. The whispers returned, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent, as if the lake was speaking directly to her. She heard her name. Emma, the voice called, the same voice from the night before. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence, something ancient, something that knew her very soul. She could feel its weight pressing on her chest, suffocating her. She stumbled back, her heart pounding in her ears. The whispers grew more frantic, more desperate. She could feel the presence pulling at her, drawing her closer to the water, urging her to listen, to understand. It was the same woman, the one from her dream, the one who had drowned. But now, there was something more in her voice, something darker. Before she could react, the water surged, as if it were alive, rising up in a massive wave that crashed toward her. Emma's scream was swallowed by the roar of the lake, and she stumbled backward, falling onto the wet ground as the wave surged past her feet, slamming against the shore. The black water was now a maelstrom, churning violently, pulling at everything in its path. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the lake stilled. The water sank back into its original position, as if nothing had happened. The only signs of the disturbance were the strange ripples that now spread outward, their edges curling in on themselves. Emma lay there on the ground, breathing heavily, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the lake's presence, its pull, like a hand gripping her insides. She didn't know how long she lay there, dazed and confused, before she finally forced herself to stand up. Her legs were shaky, and her mind was reeling. The blackening wasn't just an event. It wasn't just a phenomenon. It was a manifestation of something much darker, something that had been awakened, and Emma had just triggered it. The whispers faded, but the feeling didn't leave. The lake was alive, and it had chosen her. The events of the morning were still a blur in Emma's mind. She had barely been able to process the unsettling surge of the lake's dark waters before she was up on her feet and fleeing back toward the town. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath came in ragged gasps, as if the air itself had thickened and grown heavier with each step. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to pack her things and get as far away from Marlowe as possible. But she couldn't. Not yet. The pull of the lake, the darkness that seemed to seep into her very soul, was inescapable. It had marked her. And deep down, she knew that no matter how much she wanted to run, there was something here that demanded her attention. Something she had to understand. Something that, in a way, she had already become part of. Her legs wobbled as she walked, back toward the inn, the weight of the experience pressing on her. She didn't even remember the journey back, her mind still reeling from the chaos of what she had witnessed by the lake. The quiet town seemed to mock her, as though it knew something she didn't. A truth she was only beginning to uncover. By tea. The time she reached the inn, the sun was setting, casting long, jagged shadows across the street. The town was still as ever, its streets silent and empty. It was as though the very air itself had held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Inside the inn, the warmth of the fire was a small comfort against the deep chill that had settled in her bones. She went straight to her room, locking the door behind her. The moment the bolt clicked into place, she sank to the floor, her hands shaking as she wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The science she had clung to for so long seemed useless in the face of what she had experienced. No theory, no explanation could account for what she had seen. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from her colleague back at the university, someone she had told about her research trip. "How's the study going? Any breakthroughs? I hope you're not getting spooked by small-town rumors. Ha ha. Stay safe." Emma stared at the message, a bitter smile creeping onto her lips. Small-town rumors. That's all they were, right? She had been raised on logic, on data, on facts. But what she had seen and felt by the lake was not something that could be explained by data. No chart or graph would be able to capture the presence she had felt, the darkness in the water, or the terrifying ancient pull that had drawn her closer. She quickly typed a reply, her fingers trembling as she wrote, "I'm fine. Just some strange things going on." I'll fill you in later." She sent the message and tossed her phone onto the bed, then turned her attention to the window. The mist was rolling in again, thicker now, obscuring the lake from view. Her instinct screamed at her to leave, but she knew she couldn't. Not yet. Emma took a deep breath and forced herself to stand. She wasn't going to let fear control her, not when she was this close to understanding what was happening. There had to be answers that she could find in the history of the town. The people here knew something, she could feel it, and it was time to find out what. As the evening wore on, Emma decided to venture out again. She needed to speak to the locals, those who had lived here for years, who had seen the blackening of the lake before. She knew they were wary of her, but they also knew things that could help her make sense of what was happening. The town's only bar was located just down the street from the inn, a dimly lit building with a faded wooden sign hanging above the door. The Red Lantern. Emma pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling above her head as she entered. The smell of old wood and stale beer hit her immediately. The room was dimly lit, with a few scattered patrons nursing their drinks in silence. The air felt thick, as though it too was waiting for something to happen. She made her way to the bar, where an older man with a greying beard was wiping down glasses. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he gave her a long look, his expression unreadable. "What can I get you?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. "I need to talk," Emma said, her voice firm. She was beyond polite introductions now. "About the lake and the blackening. I think I'm in danger, and I need to understand what's going on." The bartender didn't blink, just set down the rag he was holding and folded his arms. "Danger, huh? Well, you're not the first one to think that." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "The lake, it's a part of this town, always has been. It's been here longer than anyone can remember. The old folks tell stories about it, stories they don't share with outsiders. But the thing is, you can't ignore it. You can't look at it like a puzzle to solve, because it's not. It's a curse, and it's tied to this place, to its people." Emma pressed her lips together, the words sending a chill down her spine. "A curse?" The bartender nodded. "A long time ago, before any of us were born, the lake was different. There used to be a small village at its shore, a village full of people who worshipped the water. They believed the lake was a god, and they made offerings to it. But one day they angered the god, and it punished them. The whole village drowned, and the lake turned black. The people who survived, they say they were the ones who left, but they were marked. The curse spread to the town we have now. Every 10 years, the lake turns black again. And when it does, someone has to pay." Emma's throat tightened, and she found herself leaning in, captivated despite herself. "Who pays?" "Usually someone who comes too close," the bartender said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Someone like you. You came to study the lake, didn't you? But you didn't know what you were walking into. No one can explain it, not really. But when the lake calls, you answer, whether you want to or not." The bartender's gaze softened, and he looked at her with pity. "You should leave, Miss Delacroix. The curse doesn't care if you're a scientist. It doesn't care if you're looking for answers. The lake's already got its eyes on you." Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The bartender's words hung in the air like smoke, and for the first time since she arrived in Marlow, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The next few days passed in a blur of uneasy silence. Emma couldn't shake the bartender's words from her mind, nor the unsettling presence that seemed to linger in the air around her. She continued her research during the day, hoping to find some scientific explanation for the bizarre happenings surrounding the lake. But deep down, she knew the answers she was looking for didn't lie in textbooks or old manuscripts. The town of Marlow, The lake itself had woven a web so intricate, so filled with myth and superstition, that no amount of rational thinking would be enough to pull her free. The blackness in the lake had deepened further, and with it, the silence of the town grew more pronounced. People spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously as they avoided her gaze. Emma had tried to speak with a few more locals, but each encounter had been met with tight lips and vague warnings. They didn't want to talk. Not about the lake, and certainly not about the curse. She couldn't ignore the feeling that something was brewing, something bigger than just a strange phenomenon. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as though the entire town was bracing for a storm. Emma could feel it too, the weight in the air, a pressure building with each passing day. On the 5th night of her stay, Emma made another trip to the lake, determined to find some way to document the blackening in a way that would make sense. She knew the townspeople wouldn't speak to her, but perhaps there was something to be discovered on her own, something she could observe with her own eyes. As she approached the shore, the familiar chill crept over her once again. The lake was darker tonight than ever before, the blackness like ink spilling over its surface, creeping toward the shore. The fog rolled in faster than usual, swallowing up the path ahead, its tendrils curling like snakes in the night. Emma stood at the edge of the water, her equipment set up around her, cameras, recorders, and various scientific instruments, all aimed at the water's edge. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she had to try. She began to speak into her recorder, documenting her observations as she did each night, as methodically as she could. It's nearing midnight, and the lake's surface has become even darker. The water has a strange sheen to it, almost oily. There's no obvious cause for it, no change in the chemical composition. As of now, the blackening shows no signs of slowing down. As she spoke, she noticed a sudden shift in the water. A faint ripple ran across the surface, distorting the reflection of the fog that hung above it. She paused, her finger hesitating over the recorder button as she stared out at the lake. It was subtle at first, a gentle disturbance. But then it grew, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. The ripple became a wave, slowly but surely, as though something beneath the surface was pushing against the water, causing it to shift and churn. Her eyes widened as the water began to rise, slowly at first, then faster, pushing against the shore. It wasn't a natural wave, it was wrong, as though the water was reacting to something. Then she heard it, a sound, a low, guttural growl coming from deep within the water. It was unlike anything she'd ever heard before, like an animal, but more primal. The noise reverberated through the air, vibrating in her chest, and for a moment Emma couldn't breathe. The sound was terrifying, full of malice, as if the very lake was growling in warning. Without thinking, she backed away from the shore, her feet slipping on the wet rocks as she stumbled backward. Her heart raced in her chest. The lake wasn't just reacting to her presence, it was alive, aware of her. And now it was angry. Just as she turned to leave, a dark shape appeared beneath the water. At first it was barely perceptible, just a shadow, but then it grew larger, breaking the surface. Emma froze, her entire body stiff with fear. It was a figure, a dark, indistinct shape that seemed to move and twist, as though it had no solid form. It looked almost human but distorted, the outline shifting in and out of focus as though it was being pulled from the depths. Emma's eyes widened as it rose higher, its form becoming more defined. Its face, if it could even be called that, was a twisted mask of anguish, its features a grotesque blur, as though it had been formed from the water itself. The figure reached out with long, misshapen arms, its fingers stretching toward her. And then, in an instant, it lunged forward, its arms reaching out as though to drag her into the lake. A scream tore from Emma's throat, and she stumbled backward, falling to the ground. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her heart pounding. In her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear the water splashing behind her, the figure still chasing her, its form shifting and warping as it rose from the lake. She couldn't afford to look back. She had to get away. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of the town, her legs shaking with terror, her mind spinning. She collapsed onto the nearest bench, gasping for breath, the weight of what she had just witnessed crashing over her like a tidal wave. What was that? What was in the lake? Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, low but unmistakable. It came from the darkness behind her. "You shouldn't have gone down there," a voice said. Emma turned, her heart nearly stopping in her chest. It was Mr. Harrow, the town historian. His face was pale, his expression grim. He stepped closer, his gaze flicking toward the lake, then back to her. "The lake doesn't like to be disturbed," he said, his voice thick with regret. "It has a way of dealing with people who ask too many questions, and it's already marked you." Emma swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. What is it? What's down there? What is that thing?" Mr. Harrow didn't answer at first. He only looked at her, his eyes dark and filled with something she couldn't quite read. "The lake's curse isn't just about the blackness," he said slowly. "It's about what the lake holds. And when it begins to stir, when it begins to awaken, it's because it's ready to take what it's owed. It's old, Emma, older than anything you can understand." He turned and walked away, his footsteps soft in the night, leaving Emma alone on the bench, the fear still coursing through her veins. She had seen something unnatural, something terrible, and she knew now that she could never escape. The lake had chosen her. The days after the incident by the lake felt like a blur. Emma had tried to focus on her research, to keep her mind occupied with scientific methods and logical explanations. But the events of that night, the creature that rose from the water, the unsettling presence of the lake, it all gnawed at her relentlessly. No matter how hard she tried to dismiss it, the reality of what she had witnessed continued to haunt her. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface of her thoughts, and it was growing stronger with each passing hour. She had tried to go back to her room and resume her work, telling herself that she needed to focus. She had her recorder, her field notes, and all the necessary equipment. But the more she studied the data, the more it became clear that there was no scientific explanation for what was happening. The water's blackness was untraceable, a phenomenon that defied the laws of nature. No known chemical, algae bloom, or environmental change could account for the transformation that occurred each decade. The water should have been clear, even if it was teeming with aquatic life. But it wasn't. It was black, an abyssal void that felt as though it had swallowed the very light itself. Emma spent hours poring over her data, running tests, and cross-referencing everything she could find, hoping that there would be some way to rationalize the phenomenon. But every experiment yielded the same conclusion: there was no explanation. Nothing that could explain the change in the lake. Nothing that could explain the feelings of dread that seemed to intensify with each passing day. She felt as if she was running out of time, as though something was closing in on her, pushing her toward a truth that she wasn't ready to face. The nightmares were becoming more vivid, more real. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the woman from the lake, her eyes wide and hollow, calling to her from the depths. The whispers came again, louder now, urging her to come closer. The darkness in the water beckoned, like an old, familiar friend promising her answers. But at what cost? At one point, Emma tried to leave the town for a day. She told herself she needed a break, a change of scenery, a moment to clear her mind. But as she made her way toward the town's edge, the familiar dread clawed at her, and she turned back before she could even reach the main road. It was as if the town itself was holding her in place, as though the lake's curse had already claimed her and there was no escaping it. Her frustration mounted. She had always prided herself on her ability to find answers, to break through the boundaries of the unknown with logic and science. But here, in Marlow, she was powerless. The facts didn't make sense, the science didn't add up, and the more she tried to prove that there was a rational explanation for the lake's strange blackening, the more it felt like the lake itself was pushing her deeper into the unknown. On the 6th night of her stay, Emma returned to the library, hoping to find something, anything, that would shed light on what was happening. The librarian, Mrs. Harrow, was there, as she had been each time Emma visited. She didn't acknowledge Emma's presence at first. Her attention focused on a book she was reading. It was only when Emma approached the counter that the woman looked up, her eyes dark with unspoken knowledge. "You're still here then," Mrs. Harrow said, her voice low and weary. Emma gave a stiff nod. "I'm still trying to understand what's happening. The lake, it doesn't make sense." Mrs. Harrow closed her book with a sigh and leaned forward, her hands folded tightly on the table. "The lake never makes sense, child. It's not meant to. Some things in this world are older than you can fathom. The lake has been here long before the town, before any of us. It doesn't answer to science, it doesn't obey logic. You're fighting a battle you can't win." Emma shook her head, frustration mounting in her chest. "I don't understand. You're telling me that this blackness just happens every decade and no one does anything about it? No one even tries to stop it?" Mrs. Harrow's gaze darkened, and she looked at Emma with a mixture of sadness and pity. "The townspeople know what happens when the blackness comes. They've seen it before. They've learned to live with it. It's a curse that can't be broken, not by any human means." Emma slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising in anger. "That's not good enough. This isn't a curse. It's something else, something real. I've seen it with my own eyes. The water, the figure in the lake, the voices. There's something down there, something alive. I need to know what it is. I need to know how to stop it." Mrs. Harrow's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. "You're asking the wrong questions, Emma. You're looking for answers that can't be found in books or experiments. The lake, it's tied to something much older than our understanding. To seek answers is to call forth its anger, and you've already done that." Emma froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What happens now?" The librarian didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood, her thin, frail figure moving toward a shelf at the far side of the library. She pulled a heavy, ancient-looking book from one of the shelves and placed it on the counter in front of Emma. "This is all we have left," she said softly. "The town's history, its truths. It's not for outsiders, but you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to understand the price that's been paid for the lake's power. Take it and read carefully." Emma hesitated, but took the book from Mrs. Harrow's hands. As her fingers brushed the cover, she felt a jolt of cold run through her. The book felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried a weight that had nothing to do with its physical form. She flipped the cover open, and as she began to read, her blood ran cold. The book was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. It was an ancient text, its pages yellowed and brittle, the ink faded in places, as though the words themselves were trying to escape the confines of the paper. It smelled faintly of mildew, old leather, and something else. Something darker, something that seemed to pull at the edges of her consciousness. The words were written in a language she didn't recognize at first. But as she flipped through the pages, she realized it was an old dialect, part Latin, part something more ancient, something that hadn't been spoken in centuries. Her fingers trembled as she turned each page, the heavy silence of the library pressing down on her like a weight. The librarian, Mrs. Harrow, had moved to a distant corner of the room, as though she were giving Emma space. But Emma couldn't tear her eyes away from the book. She needed to understand, needed to find the answers before the lake claimed her, as it had claimed others. As she read, the story unfolded like a nightmare, one she couldn't wake from. The book told of an ancient village that had once existed along the shores of the lake, long before Marlow had been founded. The village was built on a foundation of old rituals, offerings, and dark pacts made with the lake itself. The villagers had worshipped the lake as a god, believing it to be the source of both life and death. They had made sacrifices to it, animals, crops, and sometimes people, believing that the lake would protect them, that it would grant them power and prosperity in return. But there was one sacrifice that had been different, one that had bound the lake to the villagers in a way that could never be undone. The story told of a woman named Isabella Hartfield, a girl from a wealthy family who had been promised to the lake in exchange for the prosperity of the town. She had been forced into the water by her lover, a man named Thomas Merrick, who had broken the promises of the pact and betrayed her. Isabella had drowned in the lake, and in her death, something had awakened. The pages were filled with cryptic passages that seemed to describe the curse of the lake, the blackening of the waters. Every decade, the missing townspeople and the strange manifestations that occurred in the days leading up to it. But the part that caught Emma's eye was a passage near the end of the book. It was a warning, one that spoke directly to the reader. To those who seek the truth, beware. The lake has chosen its next vessel. The woman who will carry its burden will be marked by its curse. She will see the lake's reflection in places she should not, hear its whispers in her dreams, and feel its call in her bones. The lake will demand its payment, and only the one who is marked can end it if she dares. The word sent a shiver down Emma's spine. She felt her heart race, her fingers gripping the pages tightly. She had come here looking for answers, but this wasn't the truth she had expected. The curse, the dark figure in the water, it was all connected to Isabella, to her betrayal, to the pact that had been broken, and now it was connected to Emma. She felt a deep, sudden fear settle in her chest. What if she was the one who had been chosen? What if the lake was pulling her in, just as it had pulled Isabella so many years ago? The thought made her blood run cold. Emma slammed the book shut, trying to steady her breathing. She glanced up, toward the far corner of the library, where Mrs. Harrow was still seated. The librarian's gaze was fixed on her, watching with a quiet intensity that made Emma uneasy. "Isabella," Emma whispered, the name feeling like a weight on her tongue. "She's the key, isn't she?" Mrs. Harrow didn't answer right away. She stood slowly, as though her every movement was deliberate, controlled. She walked over to Emma, her eyes filled with something between sadness and resignation. "Yes," she said quietly. "Isabella's spirit is tied to the lake, to the curse that has haunted this town for generations, the pact she was forced into. It was never meant to be broken, and when she died, she became the lake's vengeful vessel." Emma's mind was spinning. "But why me? Why now?" Mrs. Harrow's expression softened, and for a moment Emma could see the weight of years in the older woman's eyes. "Because you've seen her, haven't you?" she asked gently. Emma froze. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. "Seen who?" "Isabella," Mrs. Harrow replied. "She's been trying to reach you. Her spirit has been calling out for someone to understand, to end the curse that binds her to the lake. And now, it has found you. She's marked you." Emma's pulse quickened, and she felt her throat tighten. "I've seen her, in my dreams, in the water. She's been there calling to me." Mrs. Harrow nodded. "The lake is not just water, Emma. It's a prison for the souls of those who have died there, those who have been sacrificed. Isabella's soul is trapped beneath its surface, and she cannot rest until the curse is lifted. But she can't do it alone. She needs someone to help her, to break the pact that binds her to the water. Someone who can see her. Someone who is marked by the lake. Emma's mind was reeling. The words were too much to take in at once. How had she become part of this ancient story? Why was she the one who was marked? But I don't know how to break it, Emma said, her voice small, filled with fear. How can I help her? How can I stop the lake from claiming me too? Mrs. Harrow hesitated, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. You must confront Isabella, she said, softly. You must go to the lake, face her spirit, and undo the pact. Only then can the curse be lifted. Only then will the lake release its hold on you. But beware, the lake does not let go easily, and you may not survive what you'll find there. Emma felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as the enormity of what Mrs. Harrow had said sank in. The curse, the woman in the water, it wasn't just a story anymore. It was her reality. She was trapped, marked by the lake, just as Isabella had been. As she closed her eyes, a sudden sound broke the silence, soft at first, then growing louder, more distinct. It was a whisper. No, a voice. The same voice that had called her in, her dreams. The same voice that had haunted her in the lake. Emma, the voice whispered, barely audible. Come to me. Emma's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do. And she knew that there was no turning back. The next morning, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her, a stillness in the air that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside her. The knowledge she had gained from the book, from Mrs. Harrow's cryptic warnings, weighed heavily on her. The lake's curse was real. Isabella's spirit was real. And now Emma was caught in the tangled web of both. It had been days since the first terrifying encounter by the water, and every corner of Marlow now seemed charged with a quiet, simmering tension. The town, it seemed, was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. There were no children playing in the streets, no casual conversations over fences. Everyone had retreated into their homes, into their own private fears. Even the air felt heavy, as though the very town itself had been infected by the lake's malevolent pull. Emma spent most of the morning pacing her room, trying to muster the courage to face what was ahead. She needed to speak to the townspeople. She needed to understand why they refused to act, why they allowed the curse to persist. They knew more than they let on. There was no doubt about it. And it was time for her to confront them. She left her room and made her way down to the inn's small dining area. The familiar scent of stale coffee and old wood filled the air, and there, sitting at a corner table, was Mr. Harrow, the town historian, the man who knew the most about the dark history of the lake. His usual posture was bent over, his eyes squinting over the edges of his glasses as he read through an ancient ledger. But when Emma entered, he looked up and met her gaze. There was no warmth in his expression, only a kind of resignation, as though he had long ago accepted that there was no escaping the inevitable. I know what you're thinking, Mr. Harrow said quietly, his voice gravelly. You're looking for answers. You want to know why we let it happen. Emma sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. Yes, she said, I need to understand. Why do you let the lake control you? Why do you let this curse linger year after year, decade after decade? You know what's happening, don't you? The lake. It's not just a strange occurrence. It's alive, and it's claiming people. Mr. Harrow's lips tightened into a thin line, and he sat back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. You don't understand, he said, his voice low. None of you ever do. You come here, you poke around, and you think you can just solve it. But this thing has been going on longer than anyone can remember. It's not something you can fix with science or logic. It's something much older. The lake is a part of us, Emma, a part of Marlowe, and it will claim what it's owed, no matter what. Emma's throat tightened. That's not an answer. It's a cop-out. You're just afraid. I am afraid, Mr. Harrow said, his voice suddenly sharp. I've seen it. I've lived through the blackening more times than I care to remember. My father, my grandfather, they all told me the same thing. It's not a curse you can fight. The lake is beyond us, beyond anything we can control. Every 10 years the water goes black, and every 10 years someone goes missing. And when it's your turn, when the lake calls your name, there's no escape. You can only pray that you're not the one it chooses. Emma felt a chill run through her, her stomach twisting. So you just give up? You just let it happen? Mr. Harrow's expression softened, and his gaze dropped to the table. It's not about giving up, he said quietly. It's about survival. You survive by keeping your head down, by not drawing attention to yourself. The town has learned to live with the lake's demands. Some of us have seen it take others, and some of us have left, never to return. But the truth is, the lake will always find someone. Always. And when it does, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Emma was silent for a long moment, trying to absorb what he was saying. It was the same thing she'd heard from every other. Local. An air of helplessness. A belief that the curse was invincible. An acceptance of the inevitable. But Emma's mind was different. She couldn't accept that. She wouldn't. There has to be a way to stop it, she said, her voice determined. Isabella, the woman in the lake, she needs to be freed, and I'm the only one who can do it. Mr. Harrow looked at her, his face drawn with a mixture of pity and sorrow. You don't know what you're saying, Emma. You think you're the one who can undo it all. You think you're the hero of this story. The lake doesn't care about heroes. It doesn't care about right or wrong. It just takes. It just claims. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his words pushing her further toward the edge of despair. But then something in her snapped. She wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. I don't care, she said firmly. I'm not going to let it take me. I'm going to find a way to end this, even if it means facing whatever's down there. I've seen it, the creature, the figure, and it's not just a myth. It's real, and it's waiting for me. Mr. Harrow was silent, his gaze fixed on her, a flicker of fear in his eyes. You're a fool if you think you can defeat the lake. But you're not the first to think so. There's a reason the town stays quiet about it, Emma. We don't talk about it because we know what happens when we do. We don't share our secrets because we don't want to drag anyone else into the madness. It's not just a curse. It's a force, something ancient and malevolent. And no matter what you do, it will take you when it's ready. Emma stood up, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. Then I'll face it when it comes, she said, her voice steely. But I will end it. I'll free Isabella, and I'll end the curse. I don't care what it costs me. Mr. Harrow watched her for a long moment, as if debating whether to try to stop her or to let her continue down her path. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but resolute. You won't be able to do it alone, he said. The lake has always chosen two to face it, one to fight and one to sacrifice. You need someone to stand with you, Emma, and you need to make sure you don't lose yourself in the process. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Two? What do you mean? Mr. Harrow didn't answer. He simply stared at her, his face etched with a deep, mournful sorrow. Find someone you trust, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And when the time comes, you'll understand. You'll know what to do. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing alone in the quiet room, the weight of his words pressing heavily on her shoulders. The lake had chosen her, But what would it take to break its hold? Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe and drop your time and location in the comments so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow, the worst is coming. The air had grown colder in Marlow, the days shorter and the nights longer. As the blackness of the lake deepened with each passing day, the tension in the town reached a fever pitch. People spoke less, their eyes darting away from Emma whenever they saw her, and more than once she caught someone watching her from a distance, their expressions unreadable. The unease in the town had become palpable, thick and suffocating, and yet no one spoke of it aloud. Everyone knew the blackness was coming, and everyone knew the price would soon be paid. Emma had resolved to face it. She would confront the lake, confront Isabella's spirit, and free both herself and the town from the curse that had bound them for generations. She could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing on her, and every day she spent researching, reading, preparing. She could feel time slipping away faster. It wasn't just the lake calling her now. It was the town. It was the entire history of Marlow, all of it reaching out, wrapping itself around her in a way she couldn't escape. On the 11th night of her stay, Emma was awakened by a loud banging at her door. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she rushed to the door, throwing it open with a sharp motion. Standing in the hallway was Mrs. Harrow, her face pale and her hands trembling as she held a small, crumpled piece of paper. "Come quickly," Mrs. Harrow gasped. "It's happening." "What's happening?" Emma asked, her mind still foggy with sleep, but her pulse already racing at the sudden urgency in the woman's voice. "It's Thomas Merrick," Mrs. Harrow continued, her voice shaking. "He's gone missing, just like the others. The lake, it's chosen him." Emma's stomach dropped. Thomas Merrick, the man whose betrayal had started this whole nightmare, was missing. But the way Mrs. Harrow spoke, it wasn't just a disappearance. It was something else. "He's been taken," Emma asked, fear creeping into her voice. Mrs. Harrow nodded, her face grim. "He's the latest one. Every decade, when the lake turns black, someone vanishes. And it's always someone tied to the history, tied to the curse. The lake, it's claiming him." Without another word, Emma followed Mrs. Harrow out into the street. The town was unnaturally quiet, not a sound to be heard except the distant howling of the wind. As they walked, Emma's thoughts raced. Thomas Merrick. His betrayal of Isabella had started all of this. His actions had condemned the entire town to this endless cycle of fear and suffering. And now, it seemed, the lake was claiming him for its own. When they reached the edge of town, Emma could see a group of people gathered near the shore. Most of them were silent, standing in small huddles, their faces drawn with fear. Among them were the town's elders, the ones who remembered the history, who had witnessed the blackening for decades. They looked at Emma with a mixture of pity and dread, as though they already knew what was coming. "Where is he?" Emma asked, her voice shaky but determined. An older man, one of the town's elders, stepped forward, his eyes clouded with sorrow. "We can't find him, Miss Delacroix. He was seen walking toward the lake just after dusk. We've searched everywhere, but the lake has taken him. It always takes the ones who are most entwined with its past. And Merrick, he's been carrying the guilt for years. The lake won't release him until it's done." Emma's heart raced. The lake didn't just take anyone. It took those who had a deeper connection, those who had caused harm or broken its unspoken rules. Isabella's death hadn't been the first, and Merrick's betrayal wouldn't be the last. But now, as the lake called for him, she realized that her time was running out. She couldn't let it take him. She had to act. "We have to go to the lake," Emma said urgently. "I can't wait any longer. We need to stop it." Mrs. Harrow's face went pale. "You can't stop it, Emma. The lake has already chosen him, and you're next." When the lake claims its next victim, there is no turning back. "I'm not going to let it take him," Emma said, her voice firm. "I'm not going to let it take anyone else." Before Mrs. Harrow could respond, Emma turned and began walking toward the shore, her resolve hardening with every step. She didn't know how much longer she had, but she couldn't wait for the lake to choose her too. She had to stop this. She had to end it. The closer they got to the shore, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The fog rolled in thicker, swirling around her ankles, as if the very ground was being drawn into the lake's depths. The air felt colder, heavier, and the distant sound of the lake, like a low, murmuring growl, seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Emma's breath fogged in the air as she stepped closer to the water, the edge of the lake now only a few feet away. The townspeople stood back, watching with fearful eyes as Emma approached the water. No one dared to go near. No one but her. Then, just as she reached the shoreline, she saw it. A figure rising from the depths. It was Thomas Merrick. His body was pale, his eyes wide open and staring, his mouth open as though he were trying to speak, but no sound came out. The water around him churned, swirling in dark, violent circles. And then the lake's grip tightened. The figure began to sink, drawn beneath the surface, swallowed by the black depths. Emma gasped and stepped forward, but Mrs. Harrow's hand gripped her wrist tightly, pulling her back. "You can't save him," Mrs. Harrow whispered, her voice breaking. "Once the lake claims them, they're gone." But Emma didn't listen. She yanked her arm free and took another step toward the water. She had to do something. She couldn't let the lake take anyone else. Not while she still had a chance. And then, as the water began to settle, she heard it again. The whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Emma." Her heart skipped a beat. It was Isabella's voice. "Come to me," the voice said. "Free me." Emma's mind raced, but she didn't hesitate. She waded into the water, the blackness surrounding her, pulling her deeper. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in short gasps. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't let the lake claim anyone else. The water surged around Emma, cold and thick like oil, as though the very lake itself were alive, twisting and pulling at her. She waded deeper, her heart pounding in her chest, the whisper of Isabella's voice still echoing in her ears. "Free me." The words were like a command, and every step she took toward the center of the lake felt like a step deeper into an ancient, forgotten world. The fog rolled around her, its tendrils curling around her legs, her arms, as if it too wanted to pull her down into the depths. She could see nothing ahead, just black water and a swirling darkness, as if the lake had no bottom. There was no shoreline, no way back. Just the voice calling to her, urging her forward. As Emma moved farther into the lake, her clothes clung to her skin, soaked with the cold, and her muscles ached from the effort of pushing through the thick water. But she couldn't stop. She had come this far, and something deep inside her told her she was reaching the point of no return. The blackness beneath the water seemed to swallow all light, and the air grew thick with a suffocating pressure, as though the very world was closing in on her. Then she saw it, a shape emerging from the water. At first it was a blur, a shadow beneath the surface, but as it grew closer, Emma's heart stopped. There, emerging from the depths, was Isabella. Her long dark hair floated around her face like seaweed, her skin pale and ghostly, her eyes wide open but empty, as if she was staring into an abyss that stretched far beyond Emma's reach. The woman's lips parted, and Emma could hear her voice clearly now. "You are the one who can free me." Emma stood frozen, her heart thudding in her chest. She had seen the figure before, in her dreams, in the reflections in her mirror. But this was real. The woman, or what was left of her, was here in front of her, emerging from the lake, trapped in its eternal grasp. The water around Isabella began to shift violently, swirling in patterns that defied reason, as if the lake itself were coming alive in response to her presence. A dark energy filled the air, crackling with tension. The ground beneath Emma's feet felt unstable, shifting as if it were being pulled toward the depths of the lake. The world was growing darker, heavier, and Emma felt as though she was standing at the edge of a chasm too deep to comprehend. "Isabella," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened to you? Why are you still here?" The woman's hollow eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment Emma felt as though the very soul of the lake was staring at her. She felt the weight of centuries of sorrow, rage, and despair. Isabella opened her mouth, but this time her words were not in the form of a whisper. They came like a rush of cold air, like a forceful wind. "I was betrayed. I was sacrificed." Emma's heart clenched. She had read about Isabella's death in the book at the library, the ancient tale of betrayal and murder. Thomas Merrick, the man who had promised to run away with her, had abandoned her to drown in the lake. The pact they had made with the lake, the pact that had cursed the town, had bound her spirit to the water forever. "But I was not the only one," Isabella continued, her voice growing faint, as though she was speaking through layers of water and time. "There were others, many others before me, who were lost to the lake's hunger. They all had their part to play in this curse." Emma stepped closer, though her feet felt heavier with each movement. The water seemed to pull her down, as though the lake itself didn't want her to reach Isabella. But she couldn't turn back. She couldn't let the curse continue. She had. To help her, even if it meant facing whatever the lake was. "What do I need to do?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How can I free you?" Isabella's face flickered, the image shifting like a reflection in water. "You must break the bond, the pact, the one made with the lake, the one that binds me to it." Emma's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. She had read the stories, the old legends in the book, but it was more than that. It was deeper. The pact that had been made so many years ago had trapped the souls of the sacrificed in the lake, pulling them into its depths to serve as its eternal prisoners. Isabella's betrayal was the key. And now, to end the curse, Emma would have to face the truth of the pact and the cost of breaking it. "But how?" Emma asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "How do I break the pact? How do I free you?" Isabella's form wavered again, and Emma could hear the faintest hint of a laugh, a hollow, bitter sound that made Emma's skin crawl. "You cannot break it alone," Isabella said softly. "The one who made the pact must face it, the one who caused the betrayal. Only they can free me." Emma felt her heart plummet. Thomas Merrick. He had been the one to betray Isabella, to condemn her to the lake. He was the key, but he was gone now, taken by the lake. Or was he? Was there still time to reach him? Was there still a way to break the curse? "Where is he?" Emma whispered, her eyes scanning the water desperately. "Where can I find him?" Isabella's ghostly form flickered once more, her eyes narrowing. "You will find him where the pact was made. But know this, his soul, like mine, is lost to the lake. To free him, you must give up your own." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She staggered back, her mind struggling to grasp what Isabella was saying. To break the pact, she would have to sacrifice herself. Her very soul. A cold, numbing silence settled over her, and the weight of the choice crushed her chest. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. She had come here to free the town, to end the curse, to stop the cycle. But the price was too high. As Isabella's form began to fade, Slipping back into the depths of the lake, Emma was left standing alone in the cold, dark water, her heart pounding, the weight of the decision pressing on her. The lake was waiting for her. The curse was waiting. And now the question wasn't whether she would face it, but what she was willing to sacrifice to end it. Emma stood still, her body cold and trembling, the weight of Isabella's words lingering in the air like a suffocating fog. The lake, the curse, the woman's spirit. They all felt like a tether, pulling her deeper into something ancient and unknowable. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but she couldn't. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. As Isabella's spectral form faded into the depths of the lake, Emma's mind raced. A sacrifice, her soul, or someone else's. She could feel the horrible weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She had hoped, prayed, that there would be a way to break the curse without paying such a terrible price. But now, standing at the water's edge, she knew there was no easy way out. The lake demanded its payment, and whether she liked it or not, she would have to give something of herself to end it. The wind howled through the trees, the fog thickening around her, and for a moment, Emma thought she heard something moving beneath the water, an unseen force stirring in the dark depths. The thought of facing the lake alone, with nothing but her own will to guide her, filled her with dread. But there was something else too, something that burned within her: determination. She would not let the lake claim another soul. She would not let it destroy the town. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't alone in this. There had to be a way to break the pact, a way to free the souls trapped in the lake without sacrificing herself. She just needed to find the right piece of the puzzle. Turning back toward the shore, Emma's gaze fell upon the ripples in the water, the surface still and dark, as though mocking her attempts to understand it. The town, the people, had lived in fear of the lake for generations, but no one had ever dared to uncover its true nature. Emma, however, wasn't going to be deterred. She couldn't allow herself to be consumed by fear and uncertainty any longer. She had to face the truth, no matter how dark it might be. Her eyes landed on a cluster of rocks further along the shoreline. Something caught her attention, something out of place, something she hadn't noticed before. It was an old, weathered stone, half buried in the sand, its surface rough and jagged. It looked ancient, worn by the passage of time, and Emma felt an odd sense of urgency tugging at her. She needed to investigate. She needed to understand. She rushed toward the rocks, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. As she crouched down to examine the stone, she saw that it was carved with symbols, ancient markings that resembled the same symbols she had seen in the book Mrs. Harrow had given her. They were part of the ritual, part of the pact that had bound the town to the lake. But there was something different about these symbols. They were incomplete, as though the full picture had been lost over time. Emma traced her fingers over the stone, her heart racing. What was it trying to tell her? What had been forgotten? She leaned in closer, her breath fogging up the stone's surface, and then she saw it. Another symbol, one that wasn't like the others. It was faint, barely visible, but there, etched into the rock's edge, was an image of a person, someone kneeling, their hands outstretched, their head bowed. In reverence, Emma's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a symbol, it was a plea, a call for help. The more she studied it, the clearer the picture became. The stone wasn't just a marker, it was a message. Someone had tried to undo the pact. Someone had tried to break free just like her, but they hadn't succeeded. The lake had claimed them just as it had claimed Isabella, just as it had claimed so many others before. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what she had to do. The stone wasn't just a relic, it was part of the ritual, part of the key to breaking the curse. She needed to find the missing pieces, the rest of the ritual, and perform it in full. She had no choice. There was no time to waste. The lake's hunger was growing, and the curse would only tighten its grip. Standing up, Emma's eyes scanned the shoreline once more, her mind racing. She had to find the others, the missing parts of the ritual. They were here, somewhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. She couldn't do it alone, though. She would need help. Someone who understood the town's history, someone who knew what had happened before, someone who could guide her through the darkness and help her break the lake's hold. And then it hit her. The answer was right in front of her. Mrs. Harrow, the town historian, the one person who had always known the lake's secrets, who had watched the curse unfold for years. Emma had already spoken to her, but there was more to learn. Mrs. Harrow had to know something about the missing pieces of the ritual, about how to finally free the town from the lake's grip. Turning toward the town, Emma's mind was set. She would confront Mrs. Harrow, she would ask the questions she had been afraid to ask, and together they would uncover the truth. As Emma walked back to town, the mist parted slightly, giving her a brief glimpse of the lake's surface. The water had calmed, but she could feel its presence, its power, pushing against her, waiting for her to make her move. The final confrontation was coming, and Emma knew that the lake wasn't finished with her yet. Emma walked quickly through the fog-drenched streets of Marlow, the weight of the discovery at the lake heavy on her shoulders. She had found the first clue, the stone, the symbols, the image of the figure kneeling in reverence to the lake. And it was clear now that there was a deeper layer to the curse, something hidden beneath the surface, buried in the town's history. But even as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, she knew she wasn't getting the full picture. There was more to this, and the only person who could help her uncover the rest of it was Mrs. Harrow. She needed answers. She needed to know about the missing pieces of the ritual, about the parts of the pact that had been obscured over time. But as she approached the library, a nagging feeling twisted in her gut. What if she was wrong? What if Mrs. Harrow wasn't the ally she thought she was? The more she had thought about it, the more she realized how quiet Mrs. Harrow had been during their last conversation. She had warned Emma about the dangers of the lake, but had she been holding something back? Had she known more than she had let on? With every step she took, the fog seemed to grow thicker, the town more oppressive. The town was holding its breath. People had grown more reclusive, more cautious. The air itself felt like it was thickening around her, and Emma couldn't help but feel that the lake was watching, waiting for her to make the wrong move. When she reached the library, the door was slightly ajar, a small sliver of light spilling out into the street. Emma hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She had to go in. She had to confront Mrs. Harrow. Time was running out, and there was no turning back. She pushed the door open slowly, the creaking sound reverberating through the empty hallway. The library, usually a quiet place of refuge, felt eerily still. The shelves, lined with old tomes and dusty manuscripts, stood like silent sentinels, casting long shadows across the floor. The only sound was the soft rustle of pages turning somewhere in the back room. As Emma stepped further inside, she called out, "Mrs. Harrow, it's Emma. I need to talk to you." There was no answer at first, only the muffled sound of movement. Then, from the back room, Mrs. Harrow's voice called out, sharp and strained. "You should not have come back, Emma." The words stopped Emma in her tracks. Her heart raced, her mind spinning with confusion. Why had Mrs. Harrow sounded so distant, so cold? "I need to know everything," Emma said, her voice firm, though it trembled slightly. About the ritual, about the lake, the truth. There was a long pause, and then Mrs. Harrow appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn, eyes dark with something Emma couldn't quite place. Fear, regret, or something else entirely. "You don't understand," Mrs. Harrow said quietly, stepping closer, her voice low. "You think you can break the curse, that you can undo what's been done, but you don't know what you're dealing with. The lake, it doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about what you want." Emma's pulse quickened. "I know what the lake is. I've seen it. I've felt it. I've seen Isabella's spirit. I know what happened to her, and I know how to stop it. But I need the full ritual, the truth. I need to know what I'm up against." Mrs. Harrow's face hardened, and she shook her head. "You don't understand. There are things better left alone, Emma. The town, we've all paid a price. The blackening, the disappearances, they are the cost of the pact. And every time someone tries to break it, they make it worse. The lake does not release its hold easily." Emma stepped forward, determination burning in her chest. "I don't care about the price. I won't let it take anyone else. I won't let it take me. Please, Mrs. Harrow, help me." Mrs. Harrow's gaze softened for a brief moment, a flash of something like sorrow crossing her features. But then it vanished, replaced by the same resignation that had been there before. "I helped once," Mrs. Harrow said, her voice trembling. "Long ago, I tried. I thought I could stop it, but I failed. And now the lake has claimed me too." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice shaking with fear. "You tried to stop it?" Mrs. Harrow's eyes flickered toward the back of the library, where the shadows seemed to deepen. "I was once a part of the town's history, before the curse truly began. I knew the lake's power, the rituals that bound it. But when the lake claimed someone I loved, someone close to me, I thought I could find a way to end it. I tried to break the pact, to change the course of things, but the lake, it's not something you can just wish away. It took everything, my family, my life. And now, Emma, it's coming for you." Emma felt a cold wave of dread crash over her. "What do you mean, it's coming for me?" Mrs. Harrow's voice was barely a whisper now, as if the words were too dangerous to say out loud. "The lake doesn't just claim one person. It takes everything from them. It pulls the town deeper into its curse. The more you try to resist, the harder it becomes to break free. And now that it's marked you, Emma, there's no escape." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Marked me?" "Yes," Mrs. Harrow replied, her eyes haunted. "You are the one who has seen too much. You are the one who's touched the water, who's delved into the past. And now, you are its next victim." Emma backed away from Mrs. Harrow, her mind racing. The lake wasn't just a curse. It was a force, a malevolent power that consumed everything in its path. She had thought she could break free, thought she could free the town, but the truth was darker than she had imagined. The lake was not just a physical entity. It was a force that had existed for as long as the town itself. It was tied to the very land, the very people who lived there. And now, she was part of it. Her thoughts swirled with fear and confusion, but she knew one thing for certain. She could not let the lake win. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. She had come this far, and she would not let it take her, or anyone else, without a fight. "I won't stop," Emma said, her voice steady now, her resolve solidifying. "I will stop it. No matter the cost." Mrs. Harrow stared at her, her face a mask of grief. "Then you are truly lost, Emma," she said softly. "You've already chosen your path, and the lake will take what it is owed." As Mrs. Harrow turned away, Emma was left standing in the dim library, the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on her. The lake had already chosen its next victim, but Emma had already made her decision. The fight wasn't over yet. The town of Marlow was suffocating under a blanket of unease. Emma could feel it in the air, in every breath she took. The lake's blackness was deeper now, its presence more oppressive, and the whispers seemed louder than ever before. Every step she took in the town felt like an echo of the curse, reverberating through her with each footfall. She had learned too much, seen too much. She had touched the lake, and now it was drawing her in, as it had done to so many before her. But Emma wasn't about to give in. She refused to accept that the lake was invincible, that there was no way to break its grip on the town. There had to be a way. She had seen the ritual in the ancient book, the incomplete symbols carved into the stone by the lake, the plea for freedom from Isabella's ghost. It was all connected, all leading her toward one thing. The lake's curse had to be undone. The library's shadows seemed to stretch longer now, darker and deeper, as Emma stood in front of the worn stone table where the ritual had been partially revealed to her. The faint symbols that had been etched into the E stone seemed to pulse in the dim light, urging her forward. She could feel the lake's pull, could feel its power pressing against her chest, but she couldn't afford to be afraid. Not now. She had already failed once, when she let doubt creep in and hesitated. But now, there was no more time for uncertainty. If she was going to free herself, free the town, and end this curse once and for all, she needed to perform the ritual. The complete ritual. She knew what had to be done. The problem was that she didn't know how. Emma turned to Mrs. Harrow, who had been sitting quietly, her face clouded with deep regret. The librarian, who had once tried to end the curse and failed, had witnessed the ritual before, and now she was the last person who could help Emma make sense of it all. Her knowledge was invaluable, but her willingness to assist was another matter entirely. Mrs. Harrow had warned Emma that the price of breaking the pact was steep, that it had taken everything from her before and would do so again. Yet there she was, still clinging to the remnants of her past, her wisdom buried beneath layers of sorrow. "You know what to do, don't you?" Emma said quietly, turning to face the older woman. "You know how to finish the ritual. You must." Mrs. Harrow's eyes flickered toward the stone table, her expression shifting with sorrow. "I tried once," she whispered. "I thought I could break the pact. But there are things in this world that are too ancient, too powerful, to be undone by a mere mortal. The lake takes what it needs, Emma. The curse has been with us long before we arrived, and it will remain long after we're gone." Emma's stomach churned at the words, but she steeled herself. "I won't stop. I can't. I know what the lake is. I've seen it. And now I've seen Isabella. I can't let her soul remain trapped. I can't let it take anyone else." Mrs. Harrow's gaze softened, but her voice was tinged with fear. "It doesn't work like that. You can't just go into the lake, recite some words, and hope it releases its hold. The ritual requires something much darker, much more dangerous. The price is more than just blood. It's your very soul." "I'm ready," Emma replied, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes." Mrs. Harrow sighed, her eyes darkening with something like sorrow or pity. "Then, if you're truly ready, you must understand what you're asking. The lake requires balance. To break the pact, to free Isabella and the others trapped within the water, you must bind yourself to it. And once that happens, you can never truly escape. The curse will mark you, and in the end, it will take from you what it is owed." Emma stood still, the weight of Mrs. Harrow's words settling over her like a cold, suffocating fog. She had no choice. There was no other option. She had already seen the darkness in the lake. She had felt it tugging at her, pulling her toward it. The water had chosen her, just as it had chosen Isabella and so many others. It wasn't just the town at stake. It was her future, her very soul. But Emma wasn't going to run. She was going to end it. She would free the souls trapped in the lake, even if it cost her everything. Mrs. Harrow slowly nodded, standing up. She walked toward the table, running her fingers along the edge of the stone. There's a phrase in the old language, a prayer, that can break the pact. It's an invocation, a binding of your soul to the lake's power. It must be spoken by someone who understands what the lake truly is, someone who has touched its power. Emma stepped closer, her voice steady as she said, "Tell me what to say. I'll do it." Mrs. Harrow took a deep breath, her face lined with years of sorrow and regret. The ritual must be performed at the lake by the water's edge. The phrase you need to speak is simple, but it's more than just words. It's a promise, a pact of its own. She turned to face Emma, her eyes meeting hers with a knowing, fearful gaze. "Say this: I free thee from the waters of sorrow, from the depths of endless night. I sever the bond that ties us, so that you may rest in peace. I give my soul as payment to end the curse and silence the lake forever." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of the words, the power that pulsed through them. They weren't just words. They were a bond, a contract with the lake itself. She knew what it meant. "The price," she said quietly. "My soul." Mrs. Harrow nodded, grimly. "Yes, the price is your soul. Once you speak those words, you bind yourself to the lake. But the curse will end. Isabella will be free, and the town will be saved." Emma felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but there was no other choice. She had come this far. She couldn't let fear stop her now. With a final nod, Emma turned toward the door. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrow. I won't forget this." Mrs. Harrow didn't reply. She simply watched Emma leave, her face etched with the grief of someone who had already made the ultimate sacrifice long ago. The night had settled heavy over Marlow, the moon casting an eerie light across the lake. The fog, which had become a constant companion, clung to the water's surface like a veil, obscuring the distant shoreline. Emma stood at the edge of the town, her breath shallow, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. The ritual was imminent. She had learned what she needed to know. The path ahead of her was clear, though the cost was more than she could fully comprehend. With the weight of Mrs. Harrow's words still fresh in her mind, Emma made her way toward the lake. The ritual was set to take place at the water's edge, as the ancient book had described, where the bond between the lake and the town had first been sealed. She had no illusions about what this meant. To free Isabella's spirit, to end the curse, she would have to give herself to the lake, to let it claim her soul. The thought churned in her stomach, the finality of it overwhelming. But as she approached the water, a strange calm settled over her. The lake's blackened surface seemed to pulse with a life of its own, rippling ever so slightly, as if it were waiting for her. She could feel the lake's presence, its power drawing her closer, beckoning her like a siren's call. Just as she reached the water's edge, a sudden shiver ran down her spine. She stopped, her heart thudding in her chest. The whisper returned. The same voice she had heard in her dreams in her waking hours, Isabella's voice, Emma. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was clearer now, more urgent, and it was coming from the water. She leaned forward, her eyes searching the black surface of the lake, as though the darkness itself might speak to her. "Don't do it." The voice was filled with a strange sadness, a warning. "You don't understand what you're about to release." Emma's heart raced. She had expected Isabella's spirit to guide her, to help her break free of the curse. But this was different. The tone of the voice, the urgency, It was not the plea of a soul seeking freedom, but a soul trapped, terrified of what might come next. "What do you mean?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here to end the curse, to free you." "Free me?" Isabella's voice echoed in the air, but this time it was colder, more distant. "You think you're freeing me? You think you're ending the curse? You're only feeding it, the lake." There was a pause, a faint rustling sound from deep within the water. "The lake is a prison, yes, but it is not just a prison for the dead. It is a prison for all who dare to challenge it. It will claim you, Emma, just as it claimed me." Emma felt a pang of confusion. "But I have to stop it. You deserve to rest. The town deserves to be free." "You don't understand," Isabella's voice whispered again, this time filled with a deep sorrow. "The lake isn't just a place, it's a living thing. And it doesn't just take souls to feed itself. It binds them. And in doing so, it becomes stronger. The ritual. What you're about to do will not free us. It will only feed the lake's hunger. It has been waiting for this moment, Emma. It has been waiting for someone like you." Emma staggered back, her mind swirling. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though the air itself was thick with the weight of Isabella's words. "You're not freeing anyone, Emma. You're not breaking the pact. You're completing it. You're giving yourself to the lake, and in doing so, you are becoming part of its curse." The voice trembled with a deep sadness. "I thought I could end it too. I thought if I died, it would end with me. But it only got stronger. The lake has claimed me, just as it has claimed countless others, and now it will claim you." The words hit Emma like a blow. She felt the cold embrace of the water around her feet, and for a brief moment, the ground beneath her seemed to shift. She had been so sure, so determined to end the curse, to free the town and herself. But now, Isabella's words felt like a bitter truth, one she hadn't been prepared to face. Could it be true? Was the ritual she was about to perform nothing more than an offering to the lake, a final piece in the puzzle that would bind her to it forever? She took a deep breath, her chest tight with fear. "But what am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If I don't perform the ritual, if I don't end it, the town will continue to suffer. People will die. It will never stop. How can I leave it like this?" The water around her seemed to swell in response, as if the lake itself was listening, waiting for her to choose. Isabella's voice softened, the sorrow within it palpable. "You must listen to the lake. It is not your enemy, Emma. It is not a thing to be fought. It is a force of nature, bound by time and memory. It has existed long before any of us, and it will continue to exist long after. You cannot break it. You can only become part of it." Emma felt a cold chill rise from the water, creeping up her legs, wrapping around her like invisible chains. The weight of the choice pressed on her chest. She had been ready to sacrifice herself to break the curse, to save the town. But now, it seemed like everything she had thought was true was crumbling around her. Is there no way to end it? No way to stop the lake from claiming anyone else? Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper, filled with desperation. The water seemed to pulse in response, and then the voice of Isabella whispered one final time, "There is another way, Emma, but it requires more than you know, more than you are willing to give. The lake must be appeased, not defeated." And with that, the voice fell silent, leaving Emma standing alone on the shore, the cold water at her feet, the weight of the choice ahead of her. The lake's blackness seemed to grow deeper, more powerful, as though it was pulling her in, claiming her as its own. Emma stood motionless, feeling the pull of the water beneath her, the suffocating weight of the curse wrapping itself around her heart. She was standing on the edge, and she knew deep down that the moment she stepped into the water, the moment she invoked the ritual, everything would change. But what would that change be? And was she truly ready to sacrifice everything, her soul, her life, her very existence, to stop the lake from claiming any more victims? The lake loomed before Emma like a living, breathing entity. Its surface was still now, its dark waters reflecting the pale light of the moon that hung heavy in the sky, casting long shadows over the shore. The fog that had been clinging to the town for days had finally begun to dissipate, leaving the lake bare and exposed, as if it too were waiting for what was to come. But to Emma it felt more like a predator, patient and silent, biding its time before it made its move. She stood at the water's edge, her feet buried in the wet sand, the cool night air wrapping around her like a shroud. She had come here to end the curse. She had come here to free the town, to break the bond between the lake and its prisoners. But after hearing Isabella's warning, after feeling the weight of the choice settle over her, she wasn't sure anymore if this was the right path. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every part of her wanted to turn back, to run from the water, to abandon the ritual, and leave the lake to claim whatever it would. But she couldn't. Not now. She had come too far, seen too much, and learned too much about the curse and the pact. The lake had already claimed the lives of so many, and if she didn't act, it would claim more. It would continue to feed on the souls of the innocent, dragging them into its depths, lost forever. With one last glance at the dark waters, Emma took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to steady the racing thoughts in her mind. The ritual was clear now, or at least she thought it was. She had everything she needed, the words, the stones, the markings, the knowledge. She had the strength to face what lay ahead, or at least she hoped she did. She thought back to her time in the library, to the cryptic words of Mrs. Harrow and the ancient book she had pored over for hours. It had spoken of sacrifice, of binding herself to the lake to break its hold. But there was something that didn't sit right in her chest. Isabella had warned her. She had warned Emma that the lake wasn't a thing to be fought. It wasn't a curse to be broken. It was a force of nature, tied to the land, tied to the very essence of this place. Still, Emma stood tall, her legs steady beneath her, her mind resolute. This is the only way, she thought. I can't stop now. The wind picked up suddenly, and Emma felt a chill run down her spine as the air around her seemed to grow colder. The lake, as if on cue, began to stir, the surface of the water rippling ever so slightly, as though it were aware of her presence, aware of the ritual she was about to perform. The whispers returned, faint at first, then louder, filling her ears with their mournful, ancient cadence. Emma! She flinched. The voice was unmistakable. Isabella's voice. It echoed from deep within the water, pulling at her like a magnet, urging her forward. Come to me. Complete the ritual. Free us all. Emma's body shook as she stepped closer to the water. She knew that she was reaching the point of no return. The ritual required more than words. It required her very being, her soul. If she succeeded, she would break the curse, release the souls trapped in the lake, and save the town. But if she failed, the thought sent a tremor through her. What if the lake didn't release its hold? What if she became trapped, just like Isabella? Or worse, what if the lake claimed her soul and never let her go? She stepped into the water, feeling the cold seep through her shoes, the icy grip of the lake pulling her deeper. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively fought against the pull. But the water was relentless. It felt as though the lake itself was alive, a hungry entity that would devour her whole if she let it. But Emma didn't let herself falter. She had made it this far, and she would finish what she had started. She focused on the words of the ritual, the ones Mrs. Harrow had taught her, the words that would break the curse. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the lake pressing in on her, the water swirling around her ankles. "I free thee from the waters of sorrow, from the depths of endless night," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rush of the water. "I sever the bond that ties us, so that you may rest in peace. I give my soul as payment, to end the curse and silence the lake forever." The words felt heavy on her tongue, like they carried the weight of centuries. As she spoke, the water around her began to churn, the surface rippling violently, as though it were reacting to her words, to the promise she had just made. The wind howled louder, whipping through her hair, but Emma stood firm, her eyes locked on the water as it began to boil and bubble, the lake awakening to the power she had invoked. A shadow emerged from the depths, rising from the water with a force that made Emma's chest tighten. The figure appeared before her, the same figure she had seen in her dreams, in the reflections in the mirror. Isabella. But this time, there was no confusion in her eyes. There was no pleading. Her face was cold, detached, her eyes dark and endless. "You've done it," Isabella's voice echoed through the water, the words chilling Emma to the core. "You've bound yourself to the lake. You've completed the ritual. But you don't understand what you've done." Emma's heart slammed against her ribs as she took a step back, the water pulling at her feet. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What have I done?" Isabella's form began to flicker, her face warping like a reflection in the water. "You've freed me, but not in the way you think. The lake will take what it is owed, Emma. And now it has taken you." The figure of Isabella began to fade, the water around Emma growing colder, darker. The lake seemed to pulse, the depths beckoning her closer, pulling her in. Emma fought against the current, but it was no use. She felt herself being drawn down, deeper into the water, her body growing heavier with each passing second. "No!" she screamed, her voice lost in the howl of the wind and the roar of the lake. But it was too late. The lake had claimed her. And as she was pulled beneath the surface, she realized too late that the ritual hadn't ended the curse. It had only fed it. The lake had swallowed Emma whole. Its cold grip dragged her deeper, pulling her into its endless, suffocating depths. Her lungs burned as she fought against the water, but it was like trying to move through molasses, each desperate stroke of her arms only sending her further down. The darkness closed in, thick and oppressive, and the faint light of the surface grew distant, lost in the abyss. Was this it? The question echoed in her mind as the weight of her sacrifice pressed down on her. She had performed the ritual. She had freed Isabella, broken the pact, but it hadn't been what she had expected. The lake had never intended to let her go. It had claimed her. It had claimed everything she had. "This is the price," she realized. "The price I paid to end the curse." The water around her shifted, and her body twisted, the currents pulling her further into the dark heart of the lake. She had been too naive to think the lake could simply be defeated, that breaking the pact could free the town. The water wasn't something to be broken. It was something that consumed, something that lived, feeding off the souls it trapped. But then, as the coldness began to numb her limbs, something else happened. A flicker of light. A movement, not from the water, but from somewhere deep within her. A memory, a fleeting moment of clarity. Emma's body tensed, and her heart raced as a new wave of energy surged through her, something stronger than fear, stronger than the grip of the lake. No. Her hands shot out, pushing against the crushing weight of the water, her body suddenly moving with purpose. She had been drowning, sinking deeper into the lake's depths. But now she had a choice. She could either let herself slip into the void, a willing sacrifice to the curse, or she could fight, just as she had fought from the beginning. She could end this. With every ounce of will she had left, Emma pushed herself upward, the darkness pressing against her with a force she could not describe. Her chest burned with the effort, her mind cloudy, but she didn't stop. The water was pulling at her, but she wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. A figure appeared before her, rising from the depths like a ghostly apparition. It was Isabella. But this time, she wasn't alone. There were others. Faces, shadows, whispers, spirits trapped beneath the lake, their eyes empty and cold, just like Isabella's had been when Emma had first seen her. The spirits were all around her, their forms flickering in and out of view like mirages, their faces twisted in silent agony. Emma. Isabella's voice came again, this time deeper, filled with a strange, otherworldly resonance. You can't escape. The lake has claimed you just as it claimed us. You are ours now. Emma's pulse quickened, but she gritted her teeth, fighting against the pressure of the water and the voices. No, she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. I won't be part of this. I won't let it take me. I won't let it take anyone else. Isabella's face twisted in sorrow, but there was something else there now, something darker. You cannot fight the lake. You cannot fight what it is. It is eternal. It is part of this land, part of the blood of this town, and now you belong to it. Emma's chest heaved as she swam, fighting against the spirits that seemed to surround her, trying to pull her back down. The weight of the curse pressed down on her, but she couldn't let herself be consumed. She had seen too much, learned too much. She knew that there had to be a way to break free. She had already come too far. As the spirits reached out, their cold fingers brushing her skin, Emma focused on the one thing that remained clear in her mind: Isabella's plea. Free me, she had whispered. Free us. Emma's hands shot out, pushing against the spirits, pushing against the weight of the water.
I will free you, she said, her voice raw, desperate. I'll end the curse, but not like this. I won't let the lake have me. The water began to churn violently, the lake fighting back. The spirits swirled around her, their voices
rising in a chorus of anguish. But Emma's resolve only hardened. She had been marked by the lake, yes, but she was not its prisoner. She was not going to let the water claim her. Not now, not ever. With one final desperate push, Emma surged toward the surface, breaking through the oppressive blackness that had surrounded her. The cold night air slammed into her lungs as she broke free from the depths, gasping for air, her hands scraping against the water's surface as she struggled to reach the shore. She wasn't done yet. The lake might have claimed her soul, but she wasn't going to let it take her body. But as she reached the shore, her strength faltered, her vision blurred, her body trembling with exhaustion. She collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, the cold, wet earth beneath her grounding her to the reality of what she had just done. The lake was still there, just behind her, its surface as dark and menacing as ever. The spirits remained, trapped within its depths, waiting for the next soul to fall prey to its hunger. Emma's body shook as the weight of her actions settled in. She had fought the lake, yes, but she hadn't broken the curse. She hadn't freed the town. And now she wasn't sure how much time she had left. She heard a voice, faint but unmistakable. Emma. It was Isabella's voice again, but this time it was softer. You've done it. You've freed us. Emma looked up, her vision swimming as she struggled to stay conscious. Isabella's spirit appeared before her, standing in the fog, her face softening with gratitude. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, her voice filled with warmth. "You've set me free, and in doing so, you've saved the town." Emma's lips parted, but she couldn't speak. The weight of the sacrifice, the weight of everything she had just done, was too much. She had saved the town, yes, but at what cost? The lake still called to her, still lurked beneath the surface, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to face it again. But as Isabella's form faded, the whispers quieted. The lake's grip loosened, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Emma felt something she hadn't before: peace. The morning after the confrontation by the lake was unlike any Emma had experienced in Marlow. The fog, which had clung to the town like a smothering shroud, had finally lifted. The air was crisp and cool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the town seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The weight that had hung over Marlow, the suffocating fear, the constant dread of the blackening waters, had lifted, and the town felt lighter, freer. Emma stood at the edge of the lake, her feet planted firmly on the soil that had once felt like a prison. The waters were calm now, their dark surface no longer swirling with malevolent energy. It was still deep, still mysterious, but it no longer felt like a consuming force. The lake was no longer a prison for the souls it had trapped. It was simply a body of water. It had been tamed, subdued, not by force, but by the release of its captives, the breaking of the curse. She could still feel the lingering presence of Isabella's spirit, but it was no longer haunting. There was a quiet peace now, a finality to the whispers that had filled her dreams. Isabella was free, and the others, the lost souls trapped beneath the lake, had found their peace as well. As Emma turned away from the lake, she was greeted by the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. The sunlight seemed brighter, warmer than she had ever remembered. It cast long shadows across the ground, but it was different now, welcoming rather than ominous. The town was waking up too. She could hear the distant sound of birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the soft hum of life returning to Marlow. People were emerging from their homes, their faces no longer filled with the tight, fearful expressions that had characterized their every step for so long. Now there was something else in the air: hope. Emma made her way back into the town, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The first person she saw was Mrs. Harrow, standing by the door of the library, her eyes tired but serene. She seemed to radiate a kind of peace that Emma hadn't seen before. She wasn't bound to the lake anymore, not in the same way. She had played her part in the story, and now the burden had been lifted. "I thought you might come by," Mrs. Harrow said softly, a faint smile crossing her lips. Emma stopped in front of her, her voice thick with emotion. "It's over. The curse. It's finally over." Mrs. Harrow nodded, her eyes glistening with something Emma couldn't quite name. "It is, and it's because of you. You've freed the town, Emma. You've freed us all." Emma shook her head, the weight of her sacrifice still heavy on her heart. "It wasn't just me, it was Isabella. It was everyone who had been trapped. The lake doesn't take forever. Eventually someone will come along who's strong enough to break its grip. It just takes time." Mrs. Harrow's smile softened. "You did more than break the curse. You showed the town what it means to face the darkness. You showed us that it doesn't have to control us." Emma thought about all the lives the lake had touched, the people who had been lost to its pull, the families who had lived in fear of the blackening for generations. The weight of it all still hung around her, but there was a sense of peace in knowing that at last they were free. The town had been cleansed. As the townspeople began to gather, their faces lightening as the fear that had plagued them for so long began to fade. Emma realized something else. They would rebuild. They would rebuild not just the town, but themselves. The curse had shaped Marlow for so long, but now the lake was no longer a source of terror. It was just part of the landscape, part of the world. It didn't have to define them. The townspeople didn't know the full story of what had happened, but they could feel the change in the air. They knew the curse was lifted. They knew that their town had been saved. As Emma stood there, surrounded by the people of Marlow, she realized how much she had changed. She had come to the town as a skeptic, a scientist looking for answers, trying to make sense of the supernatural. But in the end, it hadn't been science that saved them. It had been belief. Belief in something greater than themselves, something that connected them all. The town, the lake, the souls who had been lost. In the distance, the sun rose higher, casting its golden rays over the town. The town that had been shrouded in darkness for so long was finally bathed in light. It was over. Emma felt the weight in her chest lift, the last remnants of fear, regret, and confusion slipping away. There would be no more disappearances, no more blackening of the lake, no more whispers in the night. The town had been freed. And in that moment, as the light of the new dawn bathed Marlow, Emma knew she had done the right thing. She had freed the spirits. She had broken the curse. She had faced the darkness, and she had won. Weeks passed since the night of the lake, and with each new sunrise, Emma could feel the town of Marlow shift, slowly but surely, from the heavy gloom that had once clung to it. The curse was broken. The town was free. But Emma knew that while the lake no longer held its dark power over them, its echoes would forever remain in the hearts of the people who had lived with it for so long. The knowledge of what had happened would linger, and in some ways, it would become part of the town's history, a history that would never be forgotten. Emma had stayed longer than she had originally planned. There was a need to help the town, rebuild, to offer what little knowledge she could about how the curse had been broken, and to see the people through their transition into a new life. The town was healing, but it would take time. Time to erase the scars that the lake had left. Time to move beyond the fear that had once ruled their lives. One day, as she sat in the quiet of the library with Mrs. Harrow, Emma looked out the window at the town. The sky was clear, the fog long gone, and the streets were alive with people who no longer walked with their heads down in fear. It was as if the town itself was breathing for the first time. "I'll miss this place," Emma said, her voice thoughtful as she sat down. The book she had been reading. "I didn't expect to find peace here." Mrs. Harrow, who had been watching her with a quiet smile, nodded slowly. "No one ever expects Marlow to change. It's a town that's always lived in the shadow of the lake. But now," she paused, as if searching for the right words. "Now, it has a chance. The town has its future ahead of it. And so do you, Emma." Emma smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd be the one to change it. When I first came here, I was just looking for answers. I never imagined I'd be the one to end the curse." Mrs. Harrow's expression softened, and she stood, walking over to the shelves filled with ancient tomes. "The answers were here all along, Emma. You were just the one who was brave enough to find them." Emma stood, joining her at the shelves, her fingers trailing over the spines of the books. She thought about how much she had learned, about the town, the lake, and herself. She had come to Marlow searching for something rational, something grounded in science, but she had found something far deeper, far more real, the supernatural, the curses, the whispers of the past. They weren't just stories. They were part of the very fabric of this place, of the people who had lived and died here. And now, Thanks to her, the cycle had been broken. But there was a sadness in Emma's heart too, a quiet ache that came from knowing that the lake, while freed, had still left its mark on her. She would never forget the feeling of its pull, of the coldness, the pressure it had placed on her soul. It would stay with her, a part of her story, a chapter she could never close. But she could live with it. She could move forward. Mrs. Harrow handed her an old, weathered book, one that Emma hadn't seen before. The cover was cracked, the pages worn, but the title caught Emma's attention. The Curse of Marlowe, a history of the lake. "This is the one," Mrs. Harrow said, her voice soft. "The true story, the one the town has tried to bury for years. But now, it's time for it to be known. The curse was broken, but it's still a part of Marlowe. You've earned the right to tell it." Emma took the book, her hands trembling, slightly as she felt the weight of it in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll make sure it's remembered. I won't let the past be forgotten." Mrs. Harrow smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with a quiet wisdom. "It's not just about remembering the past, Emma. It's about learning from it. The town has been given a second chance, and so have you." As Emma looked out the window again, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The lake was still there, far in the distance, a reminder of the town's history, but it was no longer a threat. It had been freed, and with it, so had the town. So had Emma. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over the town, and for the first time since she had arrived, Emma felt a sense of belonging. She had come here to escape, to solve a mystery. But now, she had found something more. A connection to this place, to its people, and to the legacy that had been shaped by the lake. It was time for her to leave. She had done what she had come to do, and now Marlowe could continue on its own journey. But as she stepped outside the library for the last time, she realized that she would always carry the town with her. It had changed her, as much as she had changed it. And in the distance, the lake was calm, its waters now peaceful, reflecting the twilight sky. The curse was over. The town was free. And Emma had found something she hadn't known she needed: peace.